We may begin. We may begin, MC.
Okay. To lead or not to lead, it has never been a question, but a Black woman's greatest true reflection. Mbingeleli Ndlemnyama, Mbingeleli Mbogoto. I am Sthembiso Tabula, the Wits SRC Deputy President. So today I will be your program director. I'd like to hand over to Mr. Jerome September, who's the Dean of Student Affairs, who's going to do the opening and welcome for this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Ste. Good afternoon, colleagues, friends. I ask that as we begin this webinar, we just quickly take a moment of silence in memory of Nosicelo, Uinene, Asitandile, and a number of students on our campuses and women in general in society who have lost their lives over the last few weeks and months and years. If we could just please observe a moment of silence. Thank you. Good afternoon again. As introduced, I'm Jerome September, Dean of Student Affairs at Wits University. We are delighted to launch this conversation series on leadership today with three of the most distinguished women in higher education and in our country. The purpose of these conversations are really to provide our students with a platform to think about their own student leadership journeys, to think about their position in society and their contribution to society, to be inspired by role models and people in higher education, but in society more broadly, who are every day, who spend every day of their lives making a contribution in the ring, kind of fighting the fight to create a better society. These conversations started last year, and we were fortunate in our previous series to have a fantastic list of speakers. But I could not have imagined that we would begin 2021 in the manner that we have, or that we are. With three women whom I'm sure, like I do, many of you look up to, many of you follow, many of you are inspired by, and many of you are even challenged by in thinking about your own journeys and your own contributions. I'm delighted also that it is these three women. And I'm delighted because it is important, and as we speak to our own student leaders, it is important that we think carefully about who we give platform to, who we listen to, because that tells us a lot about who we are and what we are about. And so as we go into this webinar this afternoon, I want to ask you, particularly the students, and the students in this room in terms of those who have signed up, it's not only from WITS, we have students who've signed up from all public higher education institutions in South Africa. And so welcome to you to this forum. Please engage, feel free to engage. Please think deeply about your own journeys, your own contributions, but also listen with an open heart to these three amazing women who are so generous in giving us of their time, of their talent, of their insights. Learn from them this afternoon, and in learning from them, challenge yourself as you think about your own journey. They are very different women. They are doing it authentically, true to who they are and in the spaces that they find themselves. And so I hope that as we go into this afternoon and the few minutes that we have together, that you will also think about who you are, how you walk this journey, how you make a contribution where you find yourself. And that in doing so, you also reflect on the journey even beyond the university. So welcome. I now hand over. This is a platform for our students to shine. As Dean of Student Affairs, my role is simply to use that position, to use my positionality and my context to create platform for our students. So I'm going to disappear and hand over to our very able Deputy President of the WITS SRC, Stembiso Tabula, to lead us this afternoon. Welcome to everyone, and a special welcome to our panel of speakers.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jerome September. So I'm going to share a few ground rules. And because this is a Zoom platform, what we are going to do, we will be taking questions and any engagements under the chat box or the Q&A section. So if you have any questions throughout the session, you're encouraged to type them out. We'll try by all means to answer to each and every question, but also in the interest of time. So if you have any comments or you are cheering on, we'll be noting that in the chat box. I'd like to introduce the speakers, but before I do that, Gavi says, any leadership that teaches you to rely on another race for survival, that leadership will enslave you. And I'd like to add some spice and say that any leadership that teaches you to rely on another race and gender for survival, that leadership will enslave you. So the theme for August basically was Women on Top, because one thing that we can never deny is that women lead. Women lead in society, women lead their families, women lead in academia, women lead in governance, women generally lead. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to introduce all the speakers that we have. We have Professor Mamokgethi Phakeng, who's the VC of UCT. She's also known as Feb Academic. She's going to be given an opportunity to explain once we've rolled out. And we also have Professor Sibongile Mutwa, who's the VC of Nelson Mandela University. Last but not least, we have Professor Puleng, who is the VC of UNISA. So I'm going to allow Professor Mutwa to briefly give us an opening remarks regarding today's conversation, women in leadership, especially in academia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sitembiso, and thank you to everyone that has seen it fit to come and listen to us. I'm really very, very humbled. In my most of my leadership life, I have been in positions where I have to speak, and people do not know that actually speaking in public does not come that easily for me. So I'm really very, very humbled to be here, and I am going to try my best, as I always do, to just share a few insights to the colleagues that are gathered here, particularly the young people, particularly the young women, seeing that this is Women's Month as well. But as Jerome, the Dean, asked us to observe a moment of silence just now when we started, for me, it seems almost obscene that in August we celebrate Women's Month, but it is the time when actually the harm and gender-based violence against women seem to spike all the time. And we have got a lot to answer for as a nation and as the globe in that regard. I am humbled and honored indeed to have been invited to be part of this important discussion. So let me begin by expressing my appreciation to Dean September, my brother Jerome, and the University of Wits for this initiative and this invitation. And I would like to also greet students from Wits and from Nelson Mandela University, UCT, UNISA, and all our 26 universities. I would also want to extend my greeting to my esteemed colleagues who are here, both Kheti and Puleng. These are my sisters that we are struggling and dealing with the same issues in the sector. So I feel very blessed to be in their company. It is a very esteemed and dynamic company, as you know, these two colleagues. And of course, we would not be here if it was not because of the service to this nation, but particularly of the service to young people. As I start, I thought that I would just take a risk and say something about myself, which I usually do not do in public. I am a person that grew up in a place in KZN, in the south of KZN, in a place called Mbumbulu, in a place which is quite very rural, very, I would say poor, and I come from a small village there called Mdumezulu, which is actually a place, those are the valleys and mountains where I ran as a child. And then the reason I think this is important to mention is because as working at a university, one is always aware that the spaces that we occupy in universities, be it we are students, we are Black scholars, Black leaders, the universities by their nature were not made for people like us. So we've had to make our way into universities and to do the best that we can to be the example and the embodiment of leadership in a place that was not built, that was not thought of for us. And for me, that is important. I would like to preface also my remarks today by saying that while our focus today is on women, young women in particular, I believe that much of what is going to be shared by my colleagues and I today is of relevance to all aspiring and aspirant leaders. And I trust that they will be received in that spirit. The scourge of gender-based violence, as Professor Pakeng mentioned in her article that I think came out yesterday, that part of the problem that women remain subjugated is the fact that we concentrate on women in a defensive stance, whereas we need to concentrate on those that put women in the positions of precarity. So for me, I hope that we are going to be able, in whatever we say today, to speak to both men and women, even though as we focus on women. As I begin sharing some insights on women in leadership in the academy, I want to share my personal view because my own journey to the academy has not been a straight one. It has been a circuitous one. For me then, in my own lived experience, leadership is essentially an act of service, which marshals the totality of experience, which is gained along the way in very diverse circumstances, which then become a set of learned behaviors and ways of being, the ways of knowledge, of skills and attributes that we bring to the role that we have. So for me, it does not matter, in my view, where your path has taken you previously. What matters is the capacity to marshal and to use all the lessons so that you can be the best leader that you can be. And I find that having worked in all sectors of society, at least in most sectors of society, in the development sector, in the government sector, and in the university, I know for sure from experience that the challenges that women face in the academy are not that different from those that are encountered in other spaces which women occupy as leaders. I always get surprised that some of the things that I wrote in my thesis, in my PhD thesis in 1995, nothing has changed. A lot of it remains the same about women and women-headed households in particular. My own initial profession before I joined the academy, which I qualified in and I got trained in, I was a social worker. I cut my teeth as a social worker working in Soweto among the poor and the deprived in the 1980s. And what I know about the impediments to women's leadership, and those that have heard me speaking about these matters before will have to forgive me because I need to repeat these, is that women tend to underestimate their own abilities. And I was reading again the work of Bell Hooks in one of her celebrated books, Teaching to, how can I forget? Teaching to Transgress, that's her work, Teaching to Transgress. She says that the night before she was promoted to a full professor, which is called tenure, full tenure in the US. She did not sleep that night, not because she thought she was not going to be promoted, but because she thought that being promoted will take away some of the freedoms that she had enjoyed before joining the academy. So it actually goes to show that the academy still has a lot to answer for in terms of being an inclusive space. And that also, as women, we need to actually take the academy by the horns and feel and behave as if we belong in the academy because we are here and we deserve to be here. And then South Africa is a highly traditional and patriarchal society. That's another impediment to women's leadership. Leadership characteristics that are often foregrounded, that's my third point, are associated with masculinity and not with femininity. The institutional cultures of universities, they continue to perpetuate the norms, the values, and practices that legitimize the position of women as lower than that of men. So it's de-legitimization of the role of women as leaders. And then I'm just going to, in terms of the lessons that I have learned as a leader, I've learned a lot of them in the long career in leadership. But I'm going to share at least 4 of them, Sitembiso. The first one is the importance of a strong identity, to have a strong identity. Secondly, the importance of leveraging and accepting humility and vulnerability as a strength. And thirdly, I want to share the importance of working to get positive role models in your life. And fourthly, the importance of resisting erasure of what you have achieved and of who you are. That is a struggle that women need to confront all the time. As far as the first point then, a strong sense of identity, it is far too common, I find, for women to be pressured to be something else. to conform to masculine formulations of being and of leadership. This requires us, particularly the young women I want to urge, because I was not told this as a young woman. The young women have to cultivate a strong sense of independence of thought and discernment. Discernment. In a sense, they have to develop a standpoint of what they stand for and to be attuned to their own instinct and trust them and listen to those instincts. That is important. And then briefly, the issue of the question of humility and vulnerability as grace and as a strength. I find that the best way of learning to be a leader is to open yourself up to the possibility of the fact that you actually do not know everything and that you cannot be everything. Mastering leadership is a journey that is littered with mistakes. It is littered with missteps. So the capacity for self-correction and reflectiveness cannot be overemphasized. Maya Angelou reminds us, and I quote from her, that you may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated. In fact, it may be necessary for you to encounter defeats so that you can know who you are, what you can rise from, and how you can still come out of it. So it is important to be vulnerable, and it is a strength, and it is grace, and it must be embraced. Fourthly, the issue of finding positive mentors and positive role models. I do wish I had known this as a young person. In order to find positive role models, you must also first have a vision of who you are, because then you know what role models you want to find. What you want to be, in my view, will lead you a path to who you show up as a leader. And you need role models in order to do that. And then I'm going to speak about this issue of erasure that I spoke about. That is an issue, it's a question that we must resist. That you go to the university, you go to the workplace, and then you are expected to fit in. You are expected to be someone that you are not. And that we must resist all the time. And it is a daily struggle. In fact, Chimamanda Ngozi, whom I'm sure you have all read her work, she says that our histories cling to us. We are shaped by where we come from, and that we must keep with ourselves. And then there is work that I really like, the work of Phyllis Ntantala, where she writes her own biography, where she says that the reason she wrote that book, before even she lived most of her life as an academic in America, she said that she needed to tell people that there are some scattered matters and identities about me that you don't know. And I come from Kubeni in the Eastern Cape. That is where I come from. And that is what, those are the valleys and mountains that made me. So there is no single story about me. You need to understand me and take me to the fullest of who I am. And I'm going to end here, Stembiso, by also just reminding young people that leadership is not about you alone. Leadership is convening. Leadership is about hosting. And I want to really to thank you and the Dean for this, and to say that leadership and learning about leadership is a craft, and it is a practice that demands continuous refinement and constant self-improvement. So you are never done. So I thank you very much, and I wish you well in your young lives where you want to be academics, you want to be professors, you want to be scientists, you want to be leaders in the corporate sector. Just believe that inner voice and believe in it, and don't want anyone and let anyone to erase it. Thank you very much.
Sure. I must say that it's very hard to be a program director and a consumer of knowledge at the same time, and also be expected to be a timekeeper, because I'm learning a lot. And even though I'm looking at time, I'm like, no, let me allow you to speak. I need to consume as much as I can. You raised a very important point. We must resist erasure. And that for me spoke like it hit home, mainly because there is an agenda to silence women, or to silence young women in leadership in particular, mainly because they see the power young women have. And you raised an important point. You said that leadership is about saving. When I'm looking at our cultural norms, they groom young girls to be servants, but what they don't realize is that they are actually grooming us to become leaders, because being a leader, it means you must be in a position to serve. There's also something that you mentioned, that you believe that women have a tendency of underestimating themselves. And I think I have a different view. I think young women, or women in particular, are taught to look down upon themselves. I think culture has a tendency of making young women, or women in particular, to doubt themselves. Society has a role as well. And I think as a result, women end up doubting themselves and not being confident enough in their own abilities. In the interest of time, moving on to Professor Phakeng. Can you please share your opening remarks?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this event and to be part of this panel. I'm not going to waste time. I want to get right to the point, because I understand that I only have 10 minutes, and I think it will be important to have enough time for discussion. So let me say dumelang, Betsy's, Ikes, and everyone else from NMU and UNISA. It's good to be here. I've been following news reports about Tanzania's new national leader who took office just 5 months ago. The new president entered politics after first building an accomplished career as a labor activist. This leader was born in Zanzibar, a small economically struggling region that has an autonomous government, although it also participates in Tanzania's government of national unity. Zanzibar's history is marked by centuries of exploitation by foreign traders and colonialists, including the slave trade. The population is noted for its cultural, ethnic, and religious diversity, speaking both Swahili and English. In a country that is more than 63% Christian, this leader, or shall I say, this woman leader, is a Muslim and wears a traditional Muslim attire. With all of this background to draw on, what did the news headlines say when the leader took office in March? And I quote, Samia Suluhu Hassan becomes Tanzania's first woman president, close quote. Tanzanians debated whether to refer to her in the traditional African way as Mama Samia. Since then, however, media reports have focused on President Hassan's actions, bringing COVID-19 vaccines into the country after her predecessor, the late John Magufuli, denied the existence of the pandemic in Tanzania, exploring new policies to encourage business growth, and raising concern about political freedom by arresting opposition party members. As one commentator wrote, at the end of the day, Tanzanians will judge her by her performance and how she led the country. The key to building pathways for women in leadership is not just about opening the opportunity for a woman to lead, but also giving her the space to lead in her own way. Africa and the world both need different leadership to help us get out of the mess that our past leaders have put us in. And creative leadership needs to arise out of the multitude of factors that make a woman who she is. And being a woman, by the way, is not her whole story. You may see me as a woman, but I'm not just a woman. Being a woman is important, but it's not my whole story. The masculinity of power wants us to believe that there can only be one style of leader. Until recently, the power was predominantly white and Western thinking. Anyone who was different would be expected to assimilate into the roles that had been created by the masculinity of power. And of course, the masculinity of power would even tell us what being feminine looks like. And so they would say, well, this one is not behaving feminine. To be feminine is this, to be feminine is that, because the masculinity of power wants to dictate what leadership is. So women leaders were expected to become one of the boys. Men from marginalized groups, including those who were gay and non-binary, were expected to conform as much as possible to the same model. Research provides insight into the intersectionality of human identity. For instance, Dr. Dawn Pinnock, my colleague here at UCT in the Center for Criminology, traces the rise of gang violence in the Cape Flats to the forced removals under apartheid. These drove young men to join gangs in search of community life that was taken away from them. As Dawn Pinnock argues, it is not the physical conditions that former District 6 residents yearn for. It is the way in which people interacted, a feeling of sharedness. It is always the extended family that formed the catchnet of the urban poor. Within it were people who could be trusted implicitly and would give assistance willingly, immediately, and without counting the cost. Pinnock's work in many ways unravels the myth that boys will be boys. Instead, it encourages us to examine the systemic beliefs men and women have about each other and themselves. Good scholarship helps us understand these dynamics. Research from the South African Medical Research Council demonstrates that when men change their sexist, domineering, and patriarchal views about masculinity and their roles in society, sexual and gender-based violence falls dramatically. When management shifts away from the power of masculinity in business, productivity and innovation tend to rise. Well, whether people admit it or not, let me tell you this, it does rise. They might not admit it whilst the woman is still in office, but they will admit it once she's gone. The hierarchy of intersectional gender discrimination is similar to the concept of white fragility that American sociologist Robin DiAngelo discusses in her book entitled White Fragility. Robin describes white fragility as the defensive response many white people display consciously or otherwise when their whiteness is highlighted or mentioned, or their racial overview is challenged. One reason for white people's discomfort, she says, is their underlying belief that they are raceless. So to address the intersectionality of gender inequality in South Africa and in Africa, we need to confront this kind of thinking and acknowledge how we contribute to these dynamics. And Pratna Patel, who's the founding director of British Women's Support Organization, a South Hall Black Sisters Center, and a co-founder of Women Against Fundamentalism, told the United Nations in 2001 that many so-called progressive initiatives, policies, and strategies aimed at eliminating racial and gender discrimination actually serve only to reinforce the multiple levels of discrimination experienced by minority women, based on the flawed view that discrimination is one-dimensional and affects all women, all minority communities in the same way. So we may be all women, but we are many other things, and some among us are more discriminated than the other. And sometimes it's because some of us are much more visible, are much more vocal. That's the intersectionality that I want us to look at. So being an African woman leader in a previously male, white, Western world is in essence an act of disruption. You don't have to do anything. You just have to take up that leadership role in a previously male, white, Western world. In South Africa, the old hierarchy of apartheid still feeds our intersectionality. Apartheid is, of course, dead. However, it is still very much at work in our minds. As a result, a Black African woman leader has to balance many competing demands and expectations from different quarters. And I describe my own experiences of intersectional gender inequality in the new book published by Jonathan Ball, entitled When Secrets Become Stories, Women Speak Out. And it's edited by Sue Nyati. And I call those experiences walking the tightrope, because a Black African woman leader has to balance many competing demands and expectations from different quarters. When my appointment as Vice Chancellor of UCT was announced, different constituencies celebrated for different reasons. I mean, I got so many congratulations from all political parties, all leaders, everybody, all different races. But if truth be told, at the one end was what I called the picket line, marginalized people and their representatives who were seeking change, and with good reason. And they were happy and ululating for my appointment. And since I grew up poor and survived apartheid education, marginalized people saw themselves in me. Let me say, they see themselves in me and long for me to bring change. And that's why they celebrated, rightfully so. And of course, I see myself in them. After all, I was once on the picket line. Oh, perhaps maybe I'm still on the picket line, somewhat. On the other hand of the tightrope is the boardroom, representing the systems that govern the institution, systems that uphold the values of the old guard and the belief that the institution's excellence depends on sticking to tradition. The boardroom members also saw themselves in me. They may be white, they may be men, but they saw themselves in me. An internationally respected B1 NRF rated scholar, an experienced executive who is passionate about the academic project. And that's true. And they thought, there's one of us entering a system that has been dominated for centuries by masculine colonial power. And so they ululated for me. And because in their view, I was representing their interests, and they were not wrong. Just like the picket line, the boardroom was right. I represent both. While I never expected to make everyone happy all the time, after all, every decisive leader will be criticized. Note, I said decisive leader will be criticized. If you are never criticized, you should know that you're not making decisions because you are pleasing everybody. So I never expected to make everyone happy. But what surprised me was that so many of my critics focus not on what I'm trying to do in my leadership position, but on who I am, my position, my race, my gender, how I dress, hey, even how I wear my hair. I didn't expect that. So the tightrope that Black African women university executives must walk stretches across the higher education sector in South Africa. And the higher up the academic ladder a woman climbs, the shakier the tightrope becomes. And let me say, the tougher and the more decision you make and the more you succeed, the shakier the tightrope becomes. Because remember, if you succeed, you are creating history that people like you will succeed, and therefore the world will start asking for people like you all the time. As a Black woman, Vice Chancellor, in a historically white university that is still struggling with transformation, I'm constantly being pulled in different directions. And I don't think Black people understand that. When they pull me in one direction, they don't understand that on the other direction is another. Let me give you an example. I mean, the picket line says, well, she joined the boardroom. She's enjoying the aircon and the sandwiches. She forgot about us. The boardroom, in the meantime, when the picket line is busy, the boardroom looks at you and say, your people are misbehaving. Tell them to shut up. We want to go back to class. You walk in the tightrope and you want to keep going and keep alive, because in the meantime, ahead, as you walk in the tightrope, is sustainable success of the institution. It is not about you, it's about the institution. Robin Ely of the Harvard Business School, and David Thomas, the president of Morehouse College, speak in the Harvard Business Review about the need for businesses and other organizations to take proactive steps to change issues that stand in the way of gender equality. They say leaders must acknowledge that increasing demographic diversity does not by itself increase effectiveness. What matters is how an organization harnesses diversity and whether it is willing to reshape its power structure. Exploring the underlying roots of gender inequality and intersectionality involves digging into our past so that we can better understand how we contribute to that dynamic. It is an unfortunate, it's an uncomfortable conversation, but I believe it is what we need to do to clear the ground in our society so that we can build a future relationships with each other on a stronger and more balanced foundation. Without these uncomfortable conversations, we will never have a strong and more balanced foundation. Thank you very much. I look forward to the engagement.
Sure, I've learned a lot. You said being a Black African woman leader is disruptive in nature. And I concur, I really concur. And what I've realized is that if you're going to be progressive, people are not going to criticize your work. People are going to criticize your character because they are trying to look for loopholes, especially when you're a woman. And these are the difficulties that not only you as a VC you're going to face or you're currently facing, but any woman leader in any position, whether it be a student leader or whether it be a person in corporate. But I realize that we face common issues, mainly because there is an agenda to silence women because of the power they hold. I'd like to hand over the power to Prof. Buleng. Can you please share your opening remarks?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Dumelang?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Khethi. Thank you very much. I truly appreciate the initiative that Student Affairs led by Jerome September, my own colleague or former colleague, has initiated this afternoon. I think it is quite an inspiring opportunity to be amongst you, but also with the two women vice chancellors that I truly look up to and often draw insights for my own leadership. So I share this by celebrating the very panelists, Sis Bongile and Khethi, who have shared their inputs already. The second aspect that I wanted to say in really enjoining them in their analysis is the essay, is the poem by Kutuma, who says, Let us count the ways. Institutions appoint Black women in a coveted position or overted position. Institution appoints Black women as the first. Spectators raise their pom-poms and vuvuzelas as Black women inherits an institution submerged in corruption. Being the first has the Black woman afraid of breathing out of key, not in that room, not in that seat, with people attaching their oxygen to hers. Black woman spends the next years of her tenure dousing scandals and debt with damage control, keeping audits and board at bay, while being undermined by male counterparts, while being rendered a mannequin of representation. So Black girls can see themselves represented. So Black girls can inherit less foul institutions that rely on Black women being resilient because they are. I thought I should start my reflections on a very cogent analysis that I think Putuma makes in her book, Hello, Welcome, because it somewhat also speaks to what Khetsi and Sis Bongile stated around when women join institutions as leaders, especially in the academy, how the ululations and celebrations become manifest, and yet the first is to crucify them around the inherent anomalies of institutions and contradictions that such institutions have, particularly on questions of misogyny, patriarchal systems, toxic masculinities, gendered violence, and sometimes the distance or the indifference towards the promotion of Africa's knowledge systems, civilizations, but also contributions to the global knowledge arena. I thought in my own journey, in the same way that I started acknowledging the presence of the panelists, Professor Mutua and Professor Pakeng, that it is also good to glean from our forebears, the sisters who took responsibilities for leading South African higher education before us. As early as 2006, Professor Dineo Vuiswa Mazwi led CPUT and did not do so in ways that she was able to complete her tenure as best as she would have planned. The same is if we analyze another interesting forebear, Professor Mutwana, who was appointed by VUT in 2008 as the first Vice Chancellor, and the many instances that she had to grapple with around expulsions, suspensions, contestations of her leadership, ground my analysis of higher education systems within South Africa and in the global arena. I thought in the same way that colleagues would have invoked the feminist theoretical, but also praxis of locating the self within the discourse and analytics of leadership in higher education, it will be also appropriate that I just share a few insights around the philosophy that guides my scholarship, my leadership, but also the interventions that are necessary. Having acknowledged the leaders of higher education, the women, it's very important for me to say that I come not with a single story or a good story that many leaders would come with. I come as one who considers herself an insider, outsider. On the one hand, my hybridity enables me to understanding what it means to being on the margins. On the other, I understand what it means to being at the center. I was raised by parents of adoption and not parents of biology. And therefore, I have benefited from the generosity of having good parents who supported me, even though they did not have to. I also am a South African of South Africa and Lesotho descent, who's often has to grapple with the descriptions of Kilkomfere or who is she? How did she get to being a South African? And this is quite important, especially with the evolution of xenophobic, if not alienating or entwined with indifference towards women's leadership. The third aspect is that I chose to study a discipline that many people undermined or looked down at, but which allowed me the opportunity to exploring as many horizons within the academy, in the global ecumenical movement, as well as in the scholarly arena. And that's quite important because oftentimes youth and young adults and women tend to choosing what is vogue and what is fashionable, not necessarily the pathways or trajectories that enable them to cultivating the best that they are purposed to being. And I choose to be a feminist ethicist who understands the contradiction within the context of Africa of referring to oneself as a feminist, especially in the context of cultural norms, religious norms, or traditions that tend to argue that the notion of feminist or a woman who claims her moral agency in transforming herself, her society, or even the knowledge arena is frowned upon. And therefore, I make no apology, or I do not hesitate to using the notion of feminist, understanding that Alice Walker says a feminist and a womanist are as lavender is to purple, and Madipwane Masenya reminding us the context of South Africa also gives us the opportunities to framing what it means to being a feminist leader. I have noted that within the context of South Africa, contestations around the roles of women continue to emerge and will constantly emerge, primarily because, as I stated, the historical models or trajectories have not been as many to offer comparative analysis of the varied leadership approaches that women bring to the table, not just in terms of biology, phenotype, but in terms of their politics, posture, choices, decision systems, and philosophies that undergird their leadership. I noted that as we witness roles must fall, fees must fall, insourcing, which I was quite at the center of, because in many of the institutions I had worked within that period, these were the critical questions around the validity or feasibility of knowledge systems that are not attentive to the social justice agenda, but also the innovative aspects that universities must be contending or applying in resourcing the country, the continent, and the global arena. One of the women who inspires my approach to leadership is also a filmmaker, Ava Duvameni, who urges us that to always remember that as we enter places of leadership, we must be prepared to work without permission and not wait for someone to give us the green light. It is vital for us as women to engage our power by knowing that we do not need this permission. I'd say it's very important because, as my sisters, the professors and vice chancellors and excellent intellectuals have rightly stated that you have to ensure that you harness your moral agency for leadership. When Ava was directing Queen Sugar, she took the decision to work exclusively with women directors. These directors included Lucy Duke, Ms. Palmer, Mohammed, and it was quite important because it wasn't the type of directors that others would have anticipated, yet the outcome yielded what was not necessarily normative and what people were not used to, but ensured that the protagonist and the active message is included and is inclusive. The other point that I wanted to make is that it is important for us never to be limited by religious assumptions and assertions that women are the second citizen using Islam, Christianity, and other religious expression, including African culture. Because even the scholarship of these religions are themselves contested, and religion evolves with the ideas of justice always integral to the dignity of human beings. So I said that as an important barrier for us to overcoming, because sometimes people invoke elements outside the academy to create obstacles for growth. We must also, as women leaders, as colleagues have already stated, ensure that the culture of accountability is manifest. Oftentimes as women, we are undermined, disrespected, and sometimes people use their authority within the university. Let me give you an example. When I joined UNISA, within the second month of my appointment, I was taken to the CCMA for only requiring accountability from a senior member of the university management. And instead, the battles were not fought within the formal processes and procedures of the university. And instead, the idea of erasure, of underestimating competency and capabilities was played in the media. And it's quite an important area for us to understanding. Kreti says she was not attacked for her competency and for being a leading rated scholar, but it was around the skirts or probably the top or the color that she would have taken. And that's very important that we see that when processes within institutions do not work, the women are compromised and sacrificed in the social arenas where sometimes they're not even present or actively engaged. The next part that I wanted to speak to, attendant to the time, given that you've already stated that, is the whole idea that we step into these responsibilities, not because we doubt our capabilities and competencies, and not because anyone is doing us a favor, but because we have claimed for ourselves national, regional, and global leadership. Yet when women ascend this leadership, the very question around their abilities to becoming leaders plays around when the same or the corollary is not made for men. And as women leaders, therefore, we must understand that this will constantly be a feature that you have to contend with. But in using what Crenshaw reminds us around the politics of intersectionality and learning from the notion of patriarchal hierarchy as a limiting factor towards our own development, it's very important that we constantly rethink why we took assumption of this responsibility. And I think my role as a leader therefore requires me to ensuring that in my administrative leadership, my intellectual leadership, I seek to ensure that the validity and feasibility of women scholars, also of communities that are often silenced, muted, undermined, or whose dignity is trampled upon, such as persons living with disabilities, such as people from places of origin that may not be seen as important or vogue in the academic arena, but also such as persons, LGBTQIA persons, who are sometimes expected to keep quiet. And such alliances are very important, lest our leadership systems of the academy reproduce the very violent gender systems, but also violence of tokenism, of marginalization, and the very violence that actually undermines our talents. This therefore means at all points we should ask the question, is our leadership inclusive? Do I make decisive decisions and on time, which accelerate the transformations that are necessary in order that our institutions are successful? Do we create the budgets? Because sometimes you can create the spaces, but do we also support the resourcing of the systems and budgets that enable transformative work to happen in the curriculum development, in the types of languages, including inclusive language that's not violent against women or against anybody, student, staff, or anyone within the university. And this notion of inclusive leadership, I draw from the august and iconic African feminist theologian, Mercy Amba Odioye, who invites us at all points in our leadership, in universities, in private sector, but also in civil society, to ensure that the latent leadership, but also philosophy of the context within which we adjudicate or execute our leadership is attentive to the woundedness of the margins, as it is also looking to ensuring that the sites of excellence are optimized. And I think this is important because even as we speak around universities, the tendency is to think around universities as alien spaces just because they alienate us, forgetting that within the context of Africa, the idea of universities was started by a woman, the University of Al-Karawi in Fez. And therefore, it is imperative, even as we do our research, that whenever we look for when universities were started, the University of Bologna pops out, yet it was only in AD 1000 it was established, when the Al-Karawi, started by a woman in Fez, had started in 805. So it's important that we reclaim the inventions by women and understudy them on how they are resilient, they enable the transformation and impact of knowledge in enhancing society. Finally, colleagues, the notion that we generally engender care and not necessarily excellence in leadership has already been contested by my own colleagues and sisters who have presented before me. And it's something that I think is important for us to check in, because excellence for many women leaders is a key, and excellence not as the exclusionary principle of being the only person who has the voice or the podium, but that idea of ensuring successful institutions and universities that are relevant, attentive, contextually grounded, yet enabling global impact are quite imperative. And these, I need not say, in many words, but the works of Amina Mama, the works of Pumla Gola, and the works of other feminist scholars that have already been cited become key to our driving of universities as inclusive institutions, even though their historical purposes have oftentimes marginalized even us who are leading them in this historical epoch. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm willing to engage in the questions and answers or comments so that the critical influence around being an ally, supporting women, ensuring excellence, but also ensuring that African universities are sites of excellence are not undermined. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Buleng. Indeed, time flies when we're having fun. In the interest of time, I'm not going to comment on some of the things that she mentioned that really touched me. I'll just shoot straight to the questions because Professor Sibongile Mutwa needs to leave around 5:15. So my question to you, Prof, is, seeing that you are deeply committed to gender justice, social inclusion, and active democratic participation, what do you think is your role in achieving decolonized free education? Because year in and year out, we always have protest of financial exclusion. And many a times when we see women lead institutions of higher learning as vice chancellors, and who are Black in particular, we are hopeful that our society is going to change, our cries are going to be heard. So what is your role as a vice chancellor in achieving free decolonized education? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stembiso. So that's a difficult question. It's a constant and long struggle. And I believe that I've always said that our universities should be outside facing. They should be outside facing because if they are not outside facing, and I think Buleng has reflected on this, that there is a lot more that the universities traditionally have chosen to accept as a norm, as acceptable in terms of what kind of a person is acceptable as a leading scholar, irrespective of the fact that there is evidence in front of us, including my colleagues here who are leading scholars. But when I can tell you that daily they face the doubt that they must have been elevated, particularly because the university needed to have Black leaders at the top, notwithstanding that the evidence is there. So it is important that our universities, firstly, I saw a question, Stembiso, about the imposter syndrome that is in the chat. And I actually used to say, to suffer from the imposter syndrome. I don't, you see, I don't, because after 30 years of leading organizations at the top, one of them being the university, and then you actually know that evidence is out there for people to look for it, and then know that you are not an imposter. And on a question of decolonization, I think it's important to have a university that is placed, that is anchored in society, that takes on the lived experience of these communities that actually have faced precarity, that have themselves shown resilience, and actually include that as part of the university curriculum, so that we actually have the universities without borders. I think it is important to center that curriculum, which has always been excluded. But secondly, I think it is important to liberate the agency of young people in institutions. I think it is important. In 2016, for 10 months, I was leading my university as an acting vice chancellor at the time. And then the best way to respond to issues of decolonization and to deal with the issues of exclusion and to deal with the issues of subjugation of anything that is not white and that is not female is to actually make sure that you liberate the agency of young people to speak in their own voices, because the importance of the university thriving in the intergenerational conversation and dialogue is actually a university that is in conversation with itself. So the older models of governing universities with strict borders do no longer work, and then the spaces of governance need to be relooked and to break down the boundaries so that the students have voice. But also, I always say that it's not what you say, it's what you do that people watch. They watch how you lead, they watch what you say, they hear what you say, but they actually, more importantly, people want to be sure that you do not talk left and walk right. You must live the convictions of your leadership. So I think I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before I let you go, the questions that I pose to you, I'd like all the vice chancellors to answer to when it's their time to respond, because I'd really like to hear their inputs, right? Another thing, I know you have passion for like gender justice, and we have been experiencing gender-based violence in the country. And that's one thing that we can never, ever shy away from. No. So what I'd like to ask, what are the micro level solutions as a VC who's leading an institution? How are you planning on dealing with gender-based violence within your institution? And how do you get to share that with other VCs across universities to make sure that South Africa becomes a better place?
That's a good question. I'm actually working on this project at the moment because I have been requested by the minister to chair a committee, a ministerial advisory committee on gender-based harm and gender-based violence at universities. And then we've had to confront quite difficult questions because we've worked through the 26 universities. And then we know that one of the things that we need to do is to actually collaborate across institutions and to share best practice, but also to make sure that there are sanctuaries. And I'm not talking about sanctuaries as defensive positionalities, that you create an environment at a university where everyone knows that there is zero tolerance for gender-based violence at the university because of the swiftness of your response, because of the compassion of your responses. For example, at our university, what we have also done is to actually have a safe house, which is actually not in the university, so that a student who gets violated and then who needs some time to contemplate, to actually be in a space not where they were violated. But what is very, very important is to shift the attention from women. Because not to shift the attention from women is to actually say indirectly that women are the causality of gender-based violence. And for me, I believe that also we need a generic and an overarching curriculum that all students entering the university need to take as part of learning how to be a compassionate and a citizen that is believing in the centrality of the indivisibility of human rights and social justice and gender justice in particular. So all my life, the best work and the important work that I have done is to actually use my own experiences of working with women in my very young life that have been victims and survivors of gender-based violence. You know that if you create the sanctuaries, you create safe spaces of contemplation, women can feel that they are actually heard. But no problem of gender-based violence can be resolved outside the conversation with men and among men themselves, because we are a wounded society.
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much. Looking at time and all the questions that the listeners have posed, I'm just going to focus on them so that they can all be covered. Encouraging people to ask more questions. My first encounter with Professor Puleng was when she was a Dean of Student at Wits, and we had a memorial of Mamuini, and she made a remark and said, we should all be feminists. And I wanted to engage you more on what feminism is and the role of feminism in institutions of higher learning, right? But before we can even go there, there's a question from Koketo Marishane. Koketo is saying, how do you manage the balance between working to live and living to work as far as ethical leadership is concerned? I'll repeat the question. How do you manage to balance between working to live and living to work as far as ethical leadership is concerned? You can take the power.
Thank you very much. I don't know, maybe Sis Bongile and Khetiu will advise on the balance. It's one of those areas that I think I'm still negotiating myself with. I however, know that when I commit to my work, my family life, but also my participation in the social agenda, I do try to ensure that I give it my all. So that's the part that I first want to reaffirm. The second aspect that I think is important for us to reaffirm, especially taking into cognizance what Sis Bongile has just now reasserted, is that our leadership is not just limited to the institutions that we lead, but they expand and have a footprint in our society and in the global arena. Kheti says it's also through our scholarship. So 19 years ago, I wrote about rape, especially rape of children, girl children. And the idea was to demonstrate that the excuses that are often granted, that women are raped because of the types of dresses that they wear, or because of consuming alcohol or something. It was really to contest that distortion. But I also think, as my colleagues have stated, the types of ideas we bring to institutions in order to change them for the better, but also to ensuring that they are aligned to the emancipatory project and the aspirations of women, those living on the margins, but also of our society, becomes an integral aspect. So when I joined WITS, I came thinking WITS is a highly ranked university, the experience that you were talking about. Highly ranked university with the excellent students and staff. And one of the the things that challenged me, the first thing was that the participation of Black women, South African descent, or even in the continent, who were full professors, was quite alarming. At the time, Pumla was the only, not in big or Black description, but in terms of the other definitional dimension, the only Black South African woman who was a full professor. And that was quite important, that I should have initiated engagements with Professor Rukshana and with also other deans to ask the question, how do we collectively work towards ensuring that the scholarship of women, but also the development of students as leaders is asserted, affirmed, and catapulted. And one of the things that many leaders have not forgotten, me student leaders, is the fact that I agitated for the marks to be high for student leaders, because the primary participation of students in university is to study. But because students are not pedestrians, they also have to have leadership and participate in co-curricular activities. The balance, I think that ethical question that is being asked is important. So I'm sure now leaders at WITS have to have 60% or more in order to participate. But that was also that idea that I was saying, the Keti and Sis Zbongile have done when they get to university to inspire a form of excellence within the curricular space or the co-curricular space, to look for alliances within and outside. The last part I want to just state is the deans at WITS and Professor Rukshana and others can attest to this, were quite uncomfortable, Jerome, because I went to the faculties and I asked which are the modules that register the most risk for students and for women in particular. One of the deans in physics was quite, what does this have to do with you as a dean of student affairs? And I had to remind him that I'm sorry, as a dean of students, I'm also an academic intellectual who has to reflect on my leadership and scholarship around these matters. And therefore, the deans would engage with student affairs in the support of success of the students and of women students. And finally, when I joined, there were students who slept in libraries, laboratories, and having not been in a contact university, that had wounded my heart. And I therefore requested VCO and STEM to say, I cannot endure or live with this environment. And we then had to engage the provincial government to make available buildings in order to address the students who are hungry, but also who did not have residence. And we expanded the residences from 18 to 23, partnering with public providers and private providers such as Res Publica for that accommodation. So I'm just giving an example that as women leaders, when we have the support and the alliances of our universities and also men, we are able to collectively harness success, not just in the academic realm, but also in the co-curricular space. And those are just examples that I can give other than just the scholarly enterprise, but the actual interventions, including sometimes students fighting me that I changed the sanctuary to being a place of food. But now that it has flourished, I'm hoping to get some vegetables from that garden as part of historical milestones, historical, not historical, historical milestones and contributions that we as women leaders make even outside just what is considered scholarly leadership. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's a question directed to you, Prof. Feb Academic, by Utakazo Zime. The question is, how did you manage to find the balance between being an African woman as expected by societal norms and being an academic career woman? In the interest of time, can I please give you 3 minutes?
That's fine. I knew that was coming. When you come to me, you're going to be strict on time. Do you want an answer?
Sorry, Katie, I
you want an answer or you
apologize.
don't? I mean, it's tough being at UCT Puleng, you know. We always get the bottom of the of everything. So anyway, let me just, and I'm going to be brief. And if they don't get it, that's fine. There is no balance. There's always trade-offs. So I don't lie to myself. I do the things that I like. And truth is that I love my job. I love my job as an academic. I love my job as an executive. And so I do what I love. So there are things that I don't like doing and I don't do them. And I know many people do it. So I don't spend time chilling and drinking wine because I hate alcohol, you know. So, you know, I don't go around, you know, there's lots of things that I don't do, but I do a lot. But I also have to say that I was very clear with my mother when I started my PhD to explain what it means to be in academia and what it will take for me to succeed. And I said to her, I cannot be in all the funerals, baptismals, and all, you know, weddings and confirmations and all the other unveilings and everything that happens in the African family, because I get up at 3 o'clock and I stop working at 8 o'clock. So, and because she was worried that I'm embarrassing her, that I'm never there to cook the big pots, and my cousins who are teachers are there and they've got a good name in the family. And so I said, well, she's gonna have to live with it. And I told her that's what it is. So and when I say trade-offs, I really mean that. So I don't do those things, but I'm being strategic. So if there's a funeral in the family, I go only on Friday, and I only go very late after they've done all the peeling and everything, and I just do onion because I know they will leave onion, and I give them money, you know, because you know that buys a lot of favor. You just give them money. Black family will be very happy, but they still call me Umlungu. That's fine. I don't mind. So there are losses that one suffers. I live with them. I'm very clear about my hierarchy. And I can see Lebohang says the rich aunt tendency. That's problem. That's their problem if they call it rich aunt. So you decide. I don't have a theory of black tax. I know that money is needed in a funeral because they didn't plan for it. So I don't stress myself about other things. And I do know that people will talk. So I dress up properly so that I can give them something proper to talk about. I come with my gloves because my hands are precious, and I do my onions so that I would. So me, I've given up on trying to please the family or, you know, anybody in society. I do what I need to do. I chop the whole bag of onions, and then I say, I kiss them, and then I walk. I know they are going to talk. That's why I need to give them something substantial, you know. I also know that when I achieve and they see me on TV, they also talk, but they talk to get the glory to themselves. So I don't mind. So you got to decide. We are breaking ground. You know, when you're breaking ground, your kind is rare. And when your kind is rare, not everybody understands it. I'm at peace with it. I understand that many Black women, even in academia, might not understand it because I pull it off differently. I understand that Black men may not understand it. So I understand that African people may not understand it, but I know that one day when I leave this world, they will remember it. I'm here to drive an agenda to break the ground so that you guys don't have to do this over and over again. So we must normalize being who we are, at the same time achieving and ticking all the boxes. And that's why, as an academic, it was important for me not to jump every step, So I have been a tutor, senior tutor, lecturer, senior lecturer, associate professor, professor, director, dean. Every step in academia, I've been in that position. I wasn't parachuted or whatever, and it was very important for me. And also very important that I get rated. It was so that I tick all the boxes, because I know that I'm an anomaly. In so many ways, I am an anomaly. And when you're an anomaly, you are a disruptive presence. And so if you don't tick all the boxes, people will say she got there because she slept with so-and-so, even if you didn't. They'll say she got there, she's related to so-and-so. Please. So for me, it's important that I tick. My CV must be up to scratch. My job must be up to scratch, and then they have nowhere to go. Then they can start criticizing me on personality, how light I am, whatever they call it. I don't mind. The job gets done and results show. And that's why we lead now in all the 5 rankings. There you go.
Nazo, yeah, I've been doing this the whole entire time. It's just that my mic was muted. I am very inspired, and I can see the comment section, the chat session. A lot of people are sending fire emojis. Everyone is inspired. Indeed, she leads. I'd like to hand over to Mr. Jerome September for closing and for the vote of thanks.
My word, I was so into what was being said that I didn't think about this part of it. I don't think it would be appropriate for me to say anything beyond thank you. Thank you, Prof. Bakeng. Thank you, Prof. Lenkabula. Thank you, Prof. Mutwa, in your absence, for really setting the room on fire. You've challenged us, you've challenged our students, but I think you've also challenged me and everyone else in this room. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for really coming to the party in terms of getting us going and getting us thinking quite deeply. I am convinced that every person in this room is leaving with something today. They've been challenged to think quite deeply. They've been inspired. They've been asked to really, really look at their own journeys and to think about what that might mean for them. And so I want to wish you all the best on your journeys, all the best as you shape your institutions, as you shape this country, and as you do what you do best in your own respective spaces. Thank you also, Stembiso, for being such a wonderful MC, program director, facilitator of the conversation today. I know it is quite tough and we want to go on and on and on, but part of the idea of these conversations is also to stick to time. We have to honor our speakers, we have to honor the guests, and so we must stick to the time. But for those of you who want to continue engaging, this series, or this will certainly, you'll receive a copy of it, but it will also go onto the Wits YouTube page under Dean of Student Affairs as Leadership Conversations. In fact, last year's series, you will also find there. We will also, over the next couple of days, announce the next series. Of course, I am now in trouble because our speakers here today have set the bar incredibly high. But thank you for joining tonight, both Prof. Bakeng and Prof. Lenkabula. I am indebted to you. There is a little gift for each one of you, which, should I find myself in Pretoria, Prof. Puleng, I'll bring your gift. When I'm next in Cape Town, Prof. Geti, I will bring your gift from Wits to say thank you for having graced us so generously with your time. Thank you, Tembi. Thank you, Michelle, in the background. Thank you, everyone that have made today possible. All the best. See you next time. Good night.
Thank you very much, Jerome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Dean.